I'd like to begin with a story that does not appear in my recent piece for the New York Times Magazine. In February, I met a woman in a village near the Kaziranga Wildlife Reserves in Assam. And, I'll just use her initial S for reasons of safety. Like her fellow villagers, 26 families in all, S had been evicted from her original village 5 years earlier. They are all Bengali Muslims, and they told me that they had been settled in the village that they were evicted from since the 1950s. They had documents to prove their claims, their purchase of the land, their claims, the ownership of the land. And they had taken this to court, challenging the government's eviction orders, but the Assam government evicted them even though the dispute was being heard on court. So she and her fellow villagers, they spent 3 days and nights camped out on the road outside their village in an attempt to prevent a demolition, the eviction from happening. But on the third day at about 5 in the morning, police were sent in. And they were describing to me the process of eviction. Elephants and earth diggers were used to demolish their huts, and which were then set on fire. They described to me being beaten with rifle butts, of policemen picking up children and tossing them off the road into the waterlogged paddy fields on the two sides, of rubber bullets and tear gas shells being fired. As his husband, a 26-year-old man, was shot dead along with another villager. It took her 2 days to persuade the government to release his body. Now, I'd just like to quickly point out that I was led to this story, to S's story, by an Assamese journalist. I was taken to her and the other Bengali villagers by an Assamese activist. So interethnic and interreligious solidarity is not completely dead either in Assam or in India. But it survives against a concerted onslaught led by the BJP government of Narendra Modi and its various organizations, including the RSS, the paramilitary Hindu extremist organization that is explicitly inspired by the Nazis and European fascists. The eviction that I'm describing, violent, brutal, took place in 2016, shortly after the BJP won elections in Assam for the first time. 5 years later, now, with the BJP having won elections in Assam again, it is just all too easy to point out similar evictions taking place, again targeting Bengali Muslims, as in the video that we just saw, where the 31-year-old farmer wielding a stick is being shot dead by policemen and, with the government photographer accompanying them, stomping on his body. This, I think, puts the NRC in a wider context. The first set of evictions I described took place before the NRC process got into full swing. The current evictions take place after the NRC list has been completed, as Aman pointed out, but with demands for a new re-verification. But basically the point is that with or without the NRC, or with endless NRCs going on, Bengali Muslims in Assam are targets. Moinul Haq, the farmer who was killed recently, had proof of his Indian citizenship. He was on the NRC list. He possessed the national ID card that's called the Aadhaar, but it was not enough to save him from losing his home or his life. And I should also point out that even illegal, quote unquote, I do not believe in the phrase illegal migrants. To quote A. Sivanandan, there are no such things as illegal immigrants, there are only illegal governments. But even undocumented migrants do not have human rights. They are not, you cannot just shoot them and stomp on their body. I'm very, very clear about that. But here, nothing that I have heard, seen, or discovered during my reporting on the NRC for the Times Magazine piece convinced me that there was anything fair about the way it was carried out, or that there is anything justified in asking people eking out marginal existences, people who have been provided almost nothing in terms of healthcare, education, or livelihood by the state, to suddenly provide tortuous documentation of their belonging. There has been some excellent reporting in the media, by media in India and abroad, as well as studies like a recent one done by the Berkeley Center for Human Rights that have come pretty much to the same conclusion. But as we can see, with or without the NRC, the targeting of Bengali Muslims in Assam goes on. And it goes on because it is a part of a larger pattern of exclusion and violence being engineered by Narendra Modi's governments, and that ultimately extends to all Muslims everywhere in India, as well as other groups that are opposed to Modi's Hindu majoritarian agenda. There's so many examples of such violence and exclusion that we could spend a whole day together talking about it and not be able to list most of them. The NRC in Assam, of course, has led to the Exclusionary Citizenship Amendment Act, which can easily be used to target Muslims in India the way they have been targeted in Assam, people being asked again and again to prove their citizenship. Protests against the CAA, when they happened, were put down violently. Peaceful protesters targeted with concocted anti-terror charges. Nadeem Khan can talk about that as well. If you were all sitting in India, everyone who's listening, particularly ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I would ask you to expect a knock on your door tomorrow morning at both your office and then tomorrow evening at your homes, as well as a concerted campaign of hate on social media and a compliant Indian mainstream media. And I say this with some sadness because I learned my trade as a journalist and a writer 25 years ago in that very same mainstream Indian media. I spent time recently in India with an RSS man on an assignment for a US magazine. He assumed I was a sympathizer, and over the course of a few days, he spoke openly about the fact that he and the RSS and Modi's Hindu right believe that there is no place for Muslims in India. They had their chance to go to Pakistan in 1947, he told me. Why do they remain here? What should be done with them, I asked. He said that Muslims can stay and work in this ideal India of his, but without any rights of citizenship. It's exactly more or less what I heard in Assam when reporting on the NRC. It is possible, in fact, to argue that citizenship rights for Muslims in India, even now, exist largely on paper and not in reality. And it's also possible to say that none of this should be of any surprise. The pattern has been very clear since the inception of the RSS and the Hindu right, from the assassination of Gandhi to the anti-Muslim pogrom carried out in 2002 under Modi's watch as Chief Minister of Gujarat, when the United States banned him from entering this country. All too briefly, alas. Since then, Modi has been welcomed to the United States and is emboldened in his hateful agenda by every gesture of support from the US government, of which there have been far too many. So I urge you now, all of you, citizens, officials, congressmen, congresswomen, to the extent you're able, to stand against this ongoing onslaught on fundamental human rights directed at Muslims in India. And I thank you for listening to me.